come back all the time, every year, at the same time. Yeah, do you know why? That's right, it's because of the Great Hinckley Hunt. That was December 24th of 1818. And I was there. My name's Henry Hoyt. I'm from Liverpool, up the ways there.
Hey everyone, this is Tom from Adventures at Home. So today we have a different type of video for you, if you haven't been able to tell already. So several weeks ago I mentioned that we had a big event here on my property, or basically near my property. No one really knows for sure. So back in 1818, the settlers here in Hinckley and the surrounding areas were having a lot of problems with the bear, the wolves, and the wild animals. So this is a very rustic area here in Hinckley. There's a lot of hills and valleys and ledges. So it was a very difficult area to farm. So what has happened is the wild animals pretty much lived here, and they were driven out of the farmlands. So all around here in Brunswick and Medina and the surrounding areas, the ground was more level and easy to farm, easy to clear. So all of the wild animals were pretty much driven to this location in Hinckley, which is a very hilly, rustic area. And what would happen though is at night, the wild animals would come out and they would just get the sheep, get the cattle, and just pretty much raid the farmers and wipe them out overnight. So anyway, I have a storyteller, or actually a storyteller was here in Hinckley for what we call Buzzard Day. So every year, I think it's March 24th, Hinckley celebrates Buzzard Day for the return of the buzzards, the turkey vultures. And the legend is that they come back every year to feast on all of the animals that were killed during this great hunt. So anyway, John Burke is a storyteller that comes out every now and then and gives a retelling of the story, and he puts himself actually in character as I think it's Harry Hoyt. And anyway, I got John's permission to go ahead and take a video of him and have him tell the story in character. So enjoy John's presentation.
That was the biggest hunt east of the Mississippi at that time. There were hundreds of men in that hunt. And that's because there were so many wolves and bears and wild animals in the Hinckley area. There was a reason for that. Judge Hinckley, who bought all the land here back then, he was from Connecticut. And he purchased 17,000 acres here. He bought them from two maids, old maids, up in Connecticut. And you know what he paid for that? He paid one carriage, a pair of horses, and all the leather harnesses that went with it. I figure that was about $700. So you take 17,000 acres, that's about 23 cents an acre. Land's a lot more expensive today, isn't it? Yeah. Well, he gave that to his son-in-law, a man by the name of Lyman, and he had him over in Ravenna. He was supposed to sell all that land, but he had a hard time selling it. That's because all the other townships around here, it was easier to start a farm there. See, they had more level land. It was easier to take the trees down and start your farm. Here, you had all these ridges and rocks and hills. It wasn't the best for farming, so they hadn't sold much land. Now, Judge Hinckley, he had said, I think I'm going to be able to sell this land for $10 an acre someday. Now, his other son-in-law was Mr. Strong. He happened to be the governor of Massachusetts. And he was talking to Mr. Hinckley about that, and he said, well, you know, before that happens, we're all going to be in heaven. And Mr. Hinkle said, yeah, that's the devil in it. I don't think I'll see it. But this was all wilderness then. They hadn't sold any land. No cabins were built here. But you see, where all the other cabins were being built, it scared the animals into the dense forest here. It was really dense. No, nothing but wild animals, bears, wolves, raccoons. The panther had gone. Panther Cave, which is now Whip Ledges, they cleared out all the panther, but the wolves and the bears were the problem. Now, this used to be hunting land for the Indians too. When I first came here, there were several villages, and even in 1818, there was a village in the Lenape, Delaware, down along Chippewa Lake. But there was one real close, south of this lake here, south bend of the Rocky River. That was an Ottawa village. Oh, they had about 10, 12 wigwams. But they knew this was a good hunting area. And so 1818, this was after the war ended, you know, 1812 war. And when that ended, most of the Indians cleared out of this area. It wasn't Indian land anymore. But a number of them came back every year. And they'd come to Hinckley, and they'd set up their wigwams to go hunt, because it was such a great place to hunt. Well, the bears and the wolves became a real problem. It was nothing to hear. You were in a cabin at night, and you'd hear the screams of your calves and your sheep getting killed by a wolf pack or a bear. No, we tried to pen them in. We built these pens. We even put roofs on them. Put the sheep in there, put the calves in the corral. But those bears and wolves, they get in, especially the bears, even the ones where we put a roof on. They tear it up and get in there and kill all our livestock. So you know what they did? Now, Medina County had just been formed that year in 1818, and they went together with the state of Ohio, and they put a bounty on those wolf skins. One wolf skin like this, you could get $17 bounty on that. That was a lot of money then. We'd take our deer skins into the trading post, and they give us 50 cents for those, but these were worth $17. So everybody was trying to trap these, and there were wolves all over. I remember one farmer close to the Rocky River, just as it came through the center here, he lost 100 sheep in one night to the wolves. There was another just south of here, well, again along the Rocky River, over in Granger Township. His name was Smith. He lost 39 sheep in one night to the wolves. So it was a real big problem. So what the men in the territory did was they decided to have a meeting. We had a meeting up in a little settlement of Strongsville. And all the men came from the three counties around here, Medina, Cuyahoga, and Portage. And we met on September 18th that year. They discussed this problem of the wolves and the bears, and they decided to have one big hunt, and they set the date. December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1818. Men were supposed to come from all over, so they printed a circular, and we passed it around all the counties, all the cabins and families. The idea was we'd have a big circle. We'd make a big circle, and then we would drive all the animals right here in this area here to the center. And while we did that, we could kill those bears and wolves, and we'd get other game too that we could eat. Well, you know, back then too, the trees were much bigger than we got today. They were 150, 200 feet high. The trees, the trunks, where you could take 6 men, touching hands, and it would take 6 men to go around the trunk of those trees. That's how big they were. And they were hard to clear when we were trying to make a farm. We'd gird them, circle off the bark, and kill them. That way, a couple of years, 2 years later, they'd be dead and we could burn them instead of cutting them down. But this big forest, virgin forest, it had a canopy on it. It was so thick, nothing grew underneath. first limbs on the trees were 30, 40 feet high. But there's no underbrush, so it was easy hunting. We knew we could come into that dense forest here in Hinckley. We could see the game when they ran and shoot them that way. All the men to come here followed old game trails. Most of them were old buffalo trails. And the buffalo had gone a few years back. When the first pioneers came here, there were still buffalo and elk here. But the buffalo trails, they were paths pretty deep. I mean, the buffalo would come hundreds at a time, following each other, nose to tail, along these trails. Their hoofs digging deep the path. Sometimes the banks on the side were 6 to 8 feet tall. Well, first ones of us arrived, we saw that. The Indians were using this trail, so did we, and we just widened them and started putting our wagons on. So these trails are what everybody came to Hinckley on. And one of those many buffalo trails came right by here. It was now, you call it Route 3 today, and that was a buffalo trail. I'll tell you the other one, I see a number on it, it says Route 42. That was a buffalo trail also. These were our roads, just buffalo trails, but they were good. So we gathered all the men. Some came in a little early, some camped overnight. When we got up that day, it was a real crisp, bright, sunny day, kind of like this. A little colder, but we had fine crust of snow all along the ground. Now, we were going to form a circle. So we all started to march out to our positions. Crunch, you could hear the snow when we put our feet on it. Dogs, a lot of us brought dogs. Now every man had a flintlock. Pretty much everyone did, because most of us served, if you were 18 to 45 years old, you served in the War of 1812. So you brought your own flintlock gun, or you had a military one issued to you. In fact, the state of Ohio, at that time, said that every man between those ages, he had to be in the local militia. Well, that required you to have a rifle too. So some of us had rifles, some of us had smoothbore. This is a smoothbore 60 caliber. And the good thing about a smoothbore, you can put a lead ball in it, shoot your wolves and your bears. But with a smoothbore, you can also put shot in there, like buckshot. So you can kill the turkeys too. So this is a real versatile weapon, good versatile weapon. We all had guns, but some of the boys didn't. But they would bring pitchforks, and they'd bring a knife or a tomahawk, anything they could use to get small game. When we stepped out into position, we had on the north line, just north of here, the circle went further than this little area here. It was a really large circle. And also the day before, what we did is we went to the center of the circle, which is just down this road here, down in the valley, across the river. That was the center of the circle. And we marched, we went out, a couple of us, about a half a mile around, and we blazed all the trees with a tomahawk. That was to signal the hunters when they came in, they were going to stop there. So we don't want everybody to go into the very center. Someone might get shot or hurt. So we had this area blazed. But the larger circle, we formed a north line of that circle, and that was Mr. Ferris and his boys from Brunswick and north of here, North Royalton. A couple men even came from a little new settlement in Cleveland, Ohio, way up on the lake. Yeah, wasn't a big settlement then. We had about 130 men. To the east, Judge Richfield had come from Richfield Township, men from Bath and Granger Township. They came. There was about 125 of them. Then on the south side, we had Zenith Hamilton, who was the founder of Medina. He came with about 130 men and formed the southern part of the circle. And then from the west, Abraham Fries came. He was from Brunswick Hills. He brought some men from Brunswick Hills, even up into Elyria and Lorraine. So this was our circle, hundreds of men. We marched out there, and the distance between each man was as far as you could see. That formed the circle. So we got ready, And the signal was going to be bugle calls. But before he did that, Captain Seymour called it ready. He called ready to his right, and every man then, in succession, said ready. He was ready to start the hunt. And called it around, and you'd be surprised how fast that big circle, that word came all the way down and back to Captain Seymour. Then he knew everybody was ready, we were in our positions, and then the bugle sounded. Now, a couple men even brought a whole conch shell. You heard these bugles all across the valley. And then the dogs barked. And we stepped off on that crunchy icy morning of snow. Sunny, good visual. We could see the deer starting to run. Pushed by all these men forcing in the circle. There were deer that came out. We shot some deer. Then there were turkeys. The turkeys came out and they started flying, hundreds of them. I remember right next to me there was this boy, he didn't have a flintlock gun. He took his pitchfork and got one turkey. So we had lots of turkey for Thanksgiving that year. Of course, we dried it. Fox came running out. We got fox. The raccoon, they got treated by the dogs really easy. You know, the raccoon and the squirrel were the worst pilfers of grain and your stock, of wheat and everything that you raised on your farm. It was a raccoon that got into that, and those little pesky squirrels, red squirrels especially. You know, there were so many red squirrels. I didn't tell you this, but there were so many red squirrels back then. The state of Ohio made a law that every man, every able-bodied man, had to bring in 50 skins every year to reduce the population of the red squirrels. See, they came over in the Ohio River, and then they get in this great canopy of trees. They didn't touch the ground until they got to Lake Erie. We got squirrel, raccoon that came out, and we got lots of deer. Well, this center, we kept moving towards the center, and we got a couple bear, and we got a couple wolves, but most of those fierce animals, they were hidden up in the ridges and the caves, all the rocks down along which ledges in there. So when we got to those areas that were blazed, the trees that were blazed, we stopped. And then we sent in 3 sharpshooters. That was William Cogswell and his uncle Gates, and Riley the Rover. Those men were really good hunters. It was nothing for them to get hundreds of deer during the year. So we sent them in, they climbed up in a couple trees, and they started shooting the bears and the wolves they could see. We held back and let them do their job. Then they came down in trees and they went to the center themselves. And when they did that, more deer came running out, more animals. They were all able to shoot some more. It was about that time that I saw this big black bear. It was the biggest bear. You know, this is just a little tiny one, but this one had to be 6-7 feet long. And he was so big, he came running out of this little cave, and he ran down to the creek. William Cogswell saw him, and he shot it. Well, you could tell it hit the bear, but that bear just kept going like nothing bothered him. He got to the river, and he started going over there. Cogswell had reloaded his flintlock, and he shot him again. And the bear just kept going. He was going up to the high ridge. So Cogswell said, I'm gonna get my dogs. And he got his dogs, and he ran ahead of the bear. He crossed the creek in a different area, and started up that ridge, exactly where the bear was going. He almost got up to the top, and all of a sudden, Zenith Hamilton, with his 120 men from the south, he came into the area and saw this big bear. And all of a sudden, all his men started shooting at this big bear. They didn't know Cogswell was up there. Cogswell, bullets whizzing all around him. But he got up there first, and this bear was coming up this ridge, climbing right up at him, and he shot him right in the head. Bear fell down and went down the ridge right down to the creek bed again. I saw my wolf. I got my wolf there. my wolf that I got was secreted between two logs, and he kept popping his head up. So I took good aim with my flintlock, and I got my wolf scalp. That's what we used to call those skins, wolf scalps. Take them in for $17. Well, the bugle sounded again. All the gunfire had kind of settled down. And so that meant we were all supposed to go to the center. We did that, and we took roll call. We called all the men. After roll call, there was 454 hunters there that day. And then we started the big task of taking all the carcasses and the wolves and the bears and the deer and start skinning them out. We weren't going to be able to eat all of this, but we'd take as much as we could. We'd try to dry it for the winter. But that night, we were going to have a big celebration, we decided. We took Cogswell's bear, and we cut him up. He had 6 inches of flesh on him. We hung him up by the hind quarters, dressed him out, and put him over a spit fire, started a big fire, started roasting him. The fat on that bear was so fat, just drizzling down and spurting up in the fire. You know, you can use bear grease for a lot of things. You put it in your hair, it's good for hair, it's good for moisturizing your skin. In fact, the Indians just use it to keep the mosquitoes away. But there's this one man, he came up and grabbed a whole hunk of fat off that bear, and he was going around slapping it on other guys' faces. A joke, you know? We decided those wolf skins, we better do something with those. So we took those wolf skins, and by the way, we took a count of what we had right there in the center. We had 400 deer, we had 21 bear, we had 17 wolf skins like this one. So we said, well, let's go and cash those in over at the Richfield trading post. So we sent 2 men with our 17 wolf scalps, and they got the money for those. We told them, you bring back the biggest, best barrel of whiskey you can bring. So we had one celebration. We went home, we got a family, some would come. There's about 50 boys and men, they had to go home and tend to chores, but the rest of us stayed overnight. It was a fun night of drinking and dancing and singing. And people were telling stories about the hunt they did. It was a good old time. The only thing no one had thought, few had thought, to bring salt or pepper. You eat raw meat, you get kind of nauseous after a while eating it. But some of the men, they brought some Johnny cakes and bacon. And so we shared those and wrapped the meat up in bacon, and boy, did that taste good. That big bear went a long way to feeding a lot of us. That night, I just rolled up in my blanket and slept overnight on the ground, like most of the men, near the fires that we had built. Next day, it was just like the previous. It was nice and sunny, just like today. We got up, and there were 3 of us, myself and another man, Seymour, and then Bigelow from Richfield. The 3 of us were chosen to distribute all the meat evenly among the men. So we did that. Now, some of the men had pack horses, but most didn't. So they cut down a sapling so they could put it over the shoulder of 2 men, and they hung the carcasses on that, hung the meat. Some of these boys had a long ways to go, like the couple that came from, a few that came from that small settlement of Cleveland. They had to go about 30 miles, so they had a long day's travel to do that. But we had a good hunt that day. Couldn't take all that meat, so there was a lot of carcasses still around. Really cold that winter. And they stayed frozen. They froze and they stayed frozen till about middle of March, about this time. And then they thawed out. Man, all of a sudden, we saw more buzzards than we had ever seen before. These big black birds, 4 or 5 foot wingspan, they kept swooping in. First one, then another. Pretty soon there's hundreds. I remember looking at one tree, and I thought it had sprouted leaves in the middle of the winter. There must have been 100 buzzards just on that one tree. They had so much dead meat to eat, they thought they were in heaven. I think birds get that. But they ate the biggest feast they ever had. And more buzzards came and more. They liked that feast so much. Next year, they came back the same time expecting to get fed. They didn't have a feast like that, but you know what? They've been coming back ever since. Because they remember that big feast they had off of that hunt. There's another hunt the next year. Most people don't know that. Out in Brunswick Hills in Moraine area, North Ridgefield area. They tried the same thing. They got about 300 hunters. And they did a circle just like we did. Went out, but right away there was an accident. This one boy, Warner, was shot right through the heart, killed instantly. By another boy, Pritchard. He thought he was shooting at a deer. Didn't have clear vision of it and shot this boy and killed him. Later they found out that they were both cousins. But that scared everybody, and it broke the line. Some of the men went home, and so most of the animals were able to escape through the breaks in the line. So then they never showed like a good hunt like ours did. That was 1 year. But that Hinckley hunt was the biggest hunt ever east of the Mississippi. And it was a whale of a fun time. Thank you, boys and girls, for letting me speak to you today about that.